Hey guys, Buildzoid here, and today we're going to be doing the Z490 motherboard progression list. So basically we're progressing from the cheapest board to the highest end board in the order of of what I consider feature upgrades. So yeah, there's a lot of boards here, so let's get into it.
Before that, this video is brought to you by Team Group's T-Force Extreme ARGB memory, which uses a frosted finish on its heatsink to diffuse the lighting across the surface. The Extreme ARGB kits are available in various XMP configurations, including 3200 161818 and 4000 182222. If you're looking for an ARGB memory kit for your next build, check out the link in the description below for the T-Force Extreme memory.
Starting off with the cheapest motherboard, the $150 Prime Z490M- from ASUS. This board is MATX, as you can clearly see. It's got a VRM that's perfectly adequate for a 10600K, but with a 10700K it's going to start to struggle depending on your airflow, and with a 10900K it will really struggle depending on your airflow. It's a 8 power stages, 45 amps each, running in 4-phase mode, basically like a mid-range Z390 motherboard in terms of power delivery. The memory overclocking on this motherboard is going to be pretty solid, but the rear I/O on this motherboard is, in my opinion, a complete and utter disaster, but that is normal for all of the low-end Z490 boards. Like, you just get 5 USB ports, and in this case you also get 1 gig Intel LAN and then a bunch of display outputs, because these are probably meant mostly for like office PCs, but actually like Z490 motherboard in an office PC just seems wrong. But yeah, if you want a very basic motherboard for like overclocking your 10600K and you don't care about having a bunch of USB ports or really a bunch of anything, then this is actually a solid option. If you want to, do something more with your motherboard, maybe more PCIe slots, better power delivery, better troubleshooting, consider the Z490-A Pro from MSI. So this is a 6-phase VRM, but on discrete MOSFETs, and there's you've got 2 low-side MOSFETs, 2 high-side MOSFETs in each phase, as well as 2 inductors per phase, so it looks a hell of a lot like a 12-phase, but really, like, that doesn't matter too much. The main thing is, by having more components in each phase, you just get higher current handling capability. This also gets better heat sinks. There's troubleshooting LEDs on here. In the rear I/O, we've not really made much progress on the USB port front, but there's 2.5 gig Realtek LAN now instead of the 1 gig Intel, and of course it's an ATX board, so you get more PCIe slots, so basically better power. Like, for a 10700K, this should be a very fitting motherboard. Also, this uses MSI's 6-layer tabbed daisy chain memory topology, and this memory topology is freaking amazing. 4x8 memory configurations can run all the way up to 4400 megahertz if you're willing to sacrifice timing, and if you actually want like aggressive high performance memory settings, you can still do 4x8 going 4266. 2x8 is capable of 4533. It's going to depend also on your CPU, but yeah, in my experience, the motherboard topology is very strong, and so then it's just going to be down to your luck with the CPU as well as your memory kit in terms of where it's going to max out, because the boards are very, like, MSI's Z490 boards are very capable when it comes to memory overclocking. So yeah, if you just want something more suitable, like, I would generally recommend this board for like 10700Ks, and you could make it work with a 10900K, but it's not optimal for a 10900K. Like, the 10900K can pull a hell of a lot of power, and that power is at actually quite low voltage, so it's a lot of current, which makes the VRM run especially hot. So yeah, but let's say you don't like the rear I/O here and you would want more, mostly say more USB ports, maybe a slightly stronger VRM. Then there's the Z490 Gaming X from Gigabyte. So in terms of the rear I/O, we've got more USB ports. However, the LAN is now 1 gig Intel instead of 2.5 gig Realtek. So this gets you more USB ports. This is $180. This was $160. This is $180. For the power delivery, we're looking at an 11-phase V-core. That's true 11 phases, 50 amp power stages. This shouldn't have too much of a problem with the 10900K. But again, it's going to depend on the airflow. Like, 10900Ks pull a hell of a lot of power. Well, Gigabyte likes using plastic I/O shrouds because they like having integrated I/O shields, and that's one of the best ways to do that. So anyway, you still get troubleshooting LEDs on the bottom right corner of the motherboard, and this motherboard has Q-Flash functionality, so you can update the BIOS without having a CPU installed. That can also be potentially used for recovering from corrupted BIOS flashes. So yeah, that's a pretty cool feature to have as just a recovery function, as well as just an update function. Gigabyte only advertises this motherboard as supporting up to 4600 megahertz, whereas for the rest of their like higher end Z490 boards, they advertise up to 5000 megahertz. The MSI memory topology is capable of at least 4800 in my experience. So, well, is capable up to 4800 in my experience, and MSI advertises it as capable of 4800 as well. So, yeah, it's like if Gigabyte is advertising 4600 here, you're probably not going to go past 4600 with this. Not that that's really a problem, but yeah, like the memory, like I wouldn't expect this to do miracles in the memory overclocking department. But let's say you want an even stronger VRM, better VRM heat sinks, better memory overclocking support, well, and more networking focused rear I/O. Then there's the MSI Z490 Tomahawk. This is $190, and you get 1 gig Intel and 2.5 gig Realtek LAN in the rear I/O. The USB port count, I think, is slightly lower overall, but this is still a good number of USB ports to have at 7. Like I mostly count the Type A's because I don't have any Type C devices. The rear I/O on this is actually kind of really quite interesting with the 1 gig and the 2.5 gig, as well as the decent number of USB ports. The memory topology on this is the same as all the other 6-layer MSI boards, so the memory overclocking is really strong. You've got troubleshooting LEDs and massive VRM heat sinks. They don't look like they have a lot of surface area, but just because of how physically huge they are, they actually work really well. And for the VRM itself, we're looking at a 6-phase with 12 55 amp power stages. So in terms of sheer current handling capacity, this is actually stronger than what you would get on the Gaming X from Gigabyte. That's the sort of next step up, overclocking capabilities, as well as rear I/O, as long as you're not too focused on the USB ports. Now, let's say you wanted Wi-Fi, maybe Wi-Fi 6, in which case you should consider the MSI Z490 Gaming Edge Wi-Fi, which comes with Wi-Fi 6. In the rear I/O. So you've got your Wi-Fi 6, 2.5 gig Realtek LAN, and you've still got the same memory topology, same troubleshooting features as you had on the Tomahawk, but this time the VRM's got another slight upgrade, similar VRM heatsink design. This is on 60 amp smart power stages from Intercell instead of 55 amp power stages from On Semiconductor. So slightly more efficient VRM, still similar heatsinks. This should do a better job of powering a 10900K. Yeah, if you just want like Wi-Fi and strong overclocking and build quality, there's this board, and this is $200. Now, maybe you don't care so much about being the best, having the best overclocking support, and you want more PCIe slots, maybe more USB ports. In which case you should consider the Z490 Vision G from Gigabyte, which is also $200. This has a true 12-phase V-Core VRM using 50 amp power stages from Vishay Semiconductor, which is basically like that's very similar to Intercell. You've still got troubleshooting LEDs in the bottom right corner, Q flash functionality, but this has got 3 PCIe X16 slots. So if you want to run, say, 2 GPUs off of your CPU, you can do that. Maybe you have a capture card that you want to connect to the CPU, or like anything you want to connect to, like any high bandwidth device you want to connect to the CPU through PCIe. This board is going to be capable of doing that, because all of the other boards so far, like that second 16x PCIe slot runs off of the chipset. So that's what you get with the Vision G that you don't get on any of the other cheaper boards than this. The VRM on this does run kind of hot, so this is going to need some airflow if you're going to be hammering a 10900K. That's actually kind of true for all of these boards. Like, you're still going to need airflow down here. It takes, like, 10900Ks are impressively power hungry if you... Like, it depends on how far you push them, of course, but they can get quite ridiculous. And then in the rear I/O, that's the other thing, is like you get a lot of USB ports over here, as well as 2.5 gig Intel LAN. No Wi-Fi on this one. So, yeah, and this has the good memory topology, at least for Gigabyte, where this is the one that's advertised up to 5000 megahertz. So, yeah, that's the more sort of connectivity-focused motherboard for $200. Now, let's say you want a smaller motherboard, right? Maybe ATX is a bit too big for you. This is the best M-ATX motherboard you could go for. This is the $240 ROG Strix Z490-G Gaming Wi-Fi. There's also a non-Wi-Fi version, which tends to go for a little bit cheaper. You've got color-coded troubleshooting LEDs on the board over there. You've got a 12 45 amp power stage VRM running in 6-phase mode. So... honestly, like the reason I'm glossing over the phase counts is because they don't really matter that much. It just changes how the VRM has to be. Like, it just changes some design decisions that have to be made with the VRM. That don't really affect the end user, assuming that those design decisions are made correctly. The rear I/O, we're looking at Wi-Fi 6, 2.5 gig Intel LAN, BIOS flashback functionality, and a decent number of USB ports. This is what, 7? Yeah, this is back up to 7, back down to 7. This is literally the strongest M-ATX motherboard you can get on Z490. So, and also this has the same power delivery as the ATX $250 ASUS boards, which is kind of interesting. Also, this has the same memory topology as those. Honestly, if you're considering like a $250 ATX ASUS board and you only plan to have like one GPU, I would strongly suggest that you consider the Z490G instead. Maybe like even run the M-ATX board in an ATX case. Like, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. Sure, it's going to look a little bit empty, but that's just extra airflow. Anyway, so let's say you want an even smaller motherboard. Well, at $270, you could have the Z490i Aorus Ultra, and this is for the people who want their ITX system to have a lot of USB ports in the rear I/O. Also, you get Q-Flash functionality, so that's the BIOS updating capabilities. You get Wi-Fi 6, 2.5 gig Intel LAN. VRM here, we are looking at an 8-phase using 90 amp smart power stages from Intersil. Unfortunately, like the VRM ends up being ridiculously efficient, but because it's so small in terms of actual physical surface area, it can still get kind of hot depending on what, also your case airflow. But you also can't get a better VRM than this on ITX boards anyway, so you're kind of stuck with that. One noteworthy thing about the VRM here is that it is the entire output filter is made up of tantalum polymer capacitors, which means this should be one of the best motherboards in terms of voltage regulation on Z490. Not that should be that big a difference between between the various boards, but yeah, it's like this should have a slight edge over the other ITX boards in terms of at least CPU overclocking. In terms of memory overclocking, it doesn't really do anything special, and really, I would mostly be considering this board for the fact that it has for the rear I/O more so than any kind of overclocking features, because if you want overclocking, then on ITX, you really want the Meg Z490i Unify from MSI, which is also around $270. The rear I/O takes quite a hit here, where you got 2.5 gig Realtek LAN, Thunderbolt 3 though. But yeah, you lose a bunch of USB ports. So if you don't plan to take advantage of the Thunderbolt 3, this kind of sucks compared to the Ultra from Gigabyte. But if you do want to use the Thunderbolt 3, then obviously this has an advantage. Instead of some kind of BIOS flashing functionality, you get a clear CMOS button, Wi-Fi 6 from Intel, and MSI managed to squeeze debug LEDs onto this board. Gigabyte didn't manage to do that. There's also a fan integrated into the rear I/O shroud for the VRM cooling, and this uses the same 8-phase with 90 amp smart power stages that Gigabyte uses, except now the output filter is made up of through-hole aluminum polymer capacitors, which should give the board, like, that's why the Gigabyte ITX should have an edge in terms of voltage regulation for the CPU. However, when it comes to memory overclocking, this board is on SMT DIMM slots, which should give it an edge in the memory overclocking department, and also the fact that it has troubleshooting LEDs and a clear CMOS button means that if you are actually interested in just do a lot of memory overclocking, this board's going to have an edge because of the troubleshooting LEDs and the clear CMOS button and also the SMT DIMM slots. Like, this board is really focused on memory overclocking, whereas this is just sort of like, well, it's an ITX board, so because it only has 2 DIMMs, it's naturally going to be pretty good at memory overclocking, but that's really not the focus with this board, whereas MSI actually sort of went out of their way for it. Now we get up to the $300 boards, and here we get sort of the big sort of selection of, like, you can go workstation heavy or you can go overclocking heavy. If you want to go workstation heavy, Z490 Vision G is the sort of most workstation-y board, where the rear I/O, you're looking at Wi-Fi 6, 2.5 gig Intel, 1 gig Intel, Thunderbolt 3 built in, plenty of USB ports. And then on the board itself, we have this rather unique PCIe X16 slot layout with an extra 6-pin power connector, so that if you're going to be, say, doing a GPU rendering setup in this, yeah, you're not going to max out the power. Like, you're not going to be putting too much strain on the 24-pin, which is what the extra 6-pin is for. The board still has Q-Flash. You get a postcode. The thing is, the board sacrifices CPU and memory overclocking capabilities, so you only get a 12-phase with 50 amp power stages on this, which, and then they've also given this the lowest surface area heat sinks out of, I think, any Z490 Gigabyte board I've seen so far. So yeah, the 10900, like this VRM is not going to be happy with you if you hammer a 10900K on it. And also the PCB on this motherboard is based on a W480 chip. Actually, I think it might be the same exact PCB as a W480 board, which has ECC support. So the memory topology here is for ECC. The board obviously doesn't support ECC memory because it's a Z490 motherboard, but it does have this ECC memory topology, and that absolutely torpedoes memory overclocking capabilities because, yeah, Gigabyte only advertises this board as supporting up to 4400 megahertz, which, yeah, that's not great by Z490 motherboard standards, but that's because this is not really a Z490 motherboard. It's like a Xeon board that happens to have a Z490 chipset so that if you stick a 10900K in it, you can actually overclock, though the overclocking is not going to be that great. You still get a postcode though, so at least if you're troubleshooting any kind of like compatibility issues or something, then that should give you a bit of an advantage. Now, let's say you want a workstation-esque feature set, but maybe somewhat better memory overclocking support. There's the ASUS ProArt Z490 Creator 10G. This has Thunderbolt 3 in the rear I/O, 2.5 gig Intel LAN, and it comes with a 10 gig add-in card, and this board is also $300. This is, as far as I'm aware, the cheapest way of getting 10 gig and Thunderbolt 3 in like on one motherboard, because 10 gig cards are like $100, and none of the $200 boards have Thunderbolt 3 as far as I'm aware. So you can't really go and buy a $200 board and then your $100 10 gig card, and it doesn't work. You can't find the board part of that. So this is the only way to get both of those features at the same time for $300. The memory topology on this is an actual Z490 memory topology, so it doesn't run into the issue that the Vision D does, where the memory overclocking is probably going to kind of suck. This should be about the same as any other ASUS Z490 motherboard in terms of memory overclocking, which is going to be better than what the Vision D is. And then for the VRM, we are unfortunately looking at still just 12 power stages in a 6-phase configuration, and I'm not sure if they're 50s or 45s. I haven't managed to find the details on that, but the heatsink, like, well, it has more surface area, but it's not really that much better than what Gigabyte is doing. Like, yeah. Also, this board only comes with a single 8-pin power connector, so this one's also not super overclocking focused, but ASUS does use the high current variant of the 8-pin power connector, which Gigabyte also uses, and they also have the extra 4-pin. But basically, the limiting factor on both of these boards for 10900K overclocking is going to be the VRM cooling. It's not going to be how, like, getting power to the VRM is going to be no problem. Cooling the VRM, that's a different story. But obviously these are workstation boards, and you're probably like the thing is, you're probably, even if you're going to be pushing like high speed memory, you're probably not going to be hammering it. At the same time, having a stronger memory topology just in general means better stability at lower speeds as well. So it's kind of like if a hard memory overclock on a good Z490 board is like 4400 megahertz, then a hard memory overclock on this thing could be as low as 4000. So, you know, that's kind of the thing, is like, I'd rather have I really wish they hadn't compromised the memory topology. Like, I could live with the VRM heatsinks being a catastrophe, but because you can always sort of brute force that with like extra airflow over the VRM. You can't really do anything about the memory topology being bad. So anyway, if you want more overclocking, less workstation, there's the Z490E Gaming from ASUS ROG. And so with this, you get a 14 power stage 7-phase VRM using 50 amp power state DR MOS components from Vishay Semiconductor. Very large heatsink. I know it doesn't really look like it has a lot of surface area, but this style of heatsink actually works quite well. You've got a postcode. Unfortunately, it's in the worst possible location, which is under the bottom PCIe slot. Like, you shouldn't put postcodes there. That's where GPUs go. Though realistically, nobody's going to run triple GPU, but yeah, potentially it could get covered up by some kind of expansion card. So in my opinion, you shouldn't put postcodes down there. They should go up in the top right corner, but we have color-coded troubleshooting LEDs up there instead. For the rear I/O, lots of USB ports, BIOS flashback, Wi-Fi 6, 2.5 gig Intel LAN. So all around nice rear I/O. Board also includes iGPU power, so you'll have quick sync. And so far, every single board has included iGPU power, so you would have quick sync. So I've not been pointing it out. But the thing is, so you look at the Strix and you go like, well, what if I like want more overclocking features, like, I don't know, fail set or safe boot or something like that. Well, there's the MSI Z490 Unify, which has a fail set jumper, postcode, power button, reset button, retry jumper, voltage read points, troubleshooting, like the usual troubleshooting LEDs, and basically super geared towards overclocking motherboard right here. 16-phase VRM using 90 amps more power stages from Intersil, so the VRM is ridiculously powerful. However, in terms of transient response, this is probably going to be worse than what you're going to get on the Strix Z490E, because this has a hell of a lot of multi-layer ceramic capacitors in the CPU socket, whereas this is basically empty. Like, the back of the CPU socket on this board is pretty much empty, and like, it shouldn't make a huge difference, but in terms of voltage regulation, this should have an edge for the CPU. However, in terms of memory overclocking, especially in terms of like convenience when memory overclocking, this board is going to be so much better because of that failset jumper. Failset makes life, like if you're going through a lot of different settings and constant, like doing memory overclocking, failset is basically your best friend. It is such a nice feature to have. Also, in the rear I/O, this board takes a loss. There's less USB ports. You get 2.5 gig Realtek LAN Wi-Fi 6, but there's just less USB ports, which is, as far as I'm concerned, that's just worse. There's less of them there. But you do get clear CMOS and BIOS flashback functionality in the rear I/O on this board, which the BIOS flashback, you also get that on the Strix, but clear CMOS is a nice extra here. So yeah, this is the sort of like more. Oh, and this doesn't have iGPU power, so that's another problem with this motherboard. Is if you wanted to use QuickSync video encoding, you can't. The motherboard doesn't do QuickSync at all, because it literally can't power the iGPU. So basically, if you want a more daily oriented board, this is well, if you plan to use QuickSync, this has an edge. If you like the rear I/O here better, this has an edge. If you plan to do a hell of a lot of memory overclock, and in terms of CPU overclocking, I would assume this still has a slight edge. If you just plan to do a hell of a lot of memory overclocking, the Unify is going to be super nice to work with. So yeah, that's kind of the thing. Again, like, it really depends on what you're looking for. I really like the Unify, and the thing is, I do a lot of memory overclocking, so of course I really like the Unify, because I use that failset button a lot. In fact, I'm pretty sure I use the failset button more than the power button. What if you want even more overclocking than the Unify? Well, there's the Maximus 12 Apex. This is the overclocking motherboard. If all you care about is overclocking, this is the board to get. Why? It's got only 2 DIMM slots. So you don't, like, the thing is, if you have 4 DIMM slots, that's bad for memory overclocking for a bunch of reasons that we're not going to get into. This has a postcode, power button, flex key, switches for LN2 functionality, various LN2 functions, retry button, safe boot button. So instead of a jumper for failset, now you've got a dedicated safe boot button. This has dual BIOS. The Unify doesn't have dual BIOS. This has 16 70 amp smart power stages in its 8-phase VRM, which, on paper that sounds weaker than the Unify, but the 70 amp smart power stages and the 90 amp smart power stages, at least in the part of the efficiency curve that you care about running a 10900K, they're actually about the same. So it doesn't really, like, the VRM here is basically the same thing as on the Unify in terms of sheer power handling capacity, but ASUS, like, this is a step above what the Strix E does in terms of its capacitor configuration, because ASUS has actually jammed extra tantalum polymer capacitors into the CPU socket. Currently, this is considering the fact that EVGA hasn't released the Z490 Dark yet, this is basically the best Z490 overclocking board. That's literally what it is right now. It just does everything that you could possibly want from an overclocking motherboard. And even if you're going to be dailying this motherboard, this time around, this Apex is actually quite good at running 2x16 DIMMs. So honestly, even for a daily system, this could make a lot of sense. You could just buy like a set of 3200 CL14 2x16 memory sticks, overclock them to over 4000, and you've got a solid daily gaming set, a extreme daily gaming setup, right? So that's just like if you're into overclocking, then yeah, it's just get the Apex as far as I'm concerned. Now, the rear I/O on this board is, in my opinion, still solid, since you do get a ton of USB ports, Wi-Fi 6, 2.5 gig Intel LAN, clear CMOS, BIOS flashback, and you get 2 dedicated PS2 ports, because there's a bunch of benchmarks that run best on Windows XP, so the PS2 ports are there for that. Now, the one downside with this motherboard is there's no iGPU power because ASUS is really prioritizing CPU power delivery with this thing. If you wanted a more dailyable board, there's the Maximus 12 Hero, which you get 5 gig LAN, 1 gig LAN, bunch of USB ports, Wi-Fi 6, clear CMOS, BIOS flashback. You get iGPU power, you can see it because of the HDMI output. But the VRM on this is a bit weaker. This is on 60 amp smart power stages, and it's only 14 power stages in a 7-phase configuration instead of 16 power stages in an 8-phase configuration. Not that it's going to make a difference, because the 60 amp smart power stages are basically are very similar to the 70s in terms of efficiency as well. So yeah, you don't have to be too concerned about that. You have a postcode power button flex key, so you can rebind the flex key to be the safe boot functionality. So that's really cool. Yeah, the thing is though, I feel like if you're considering this board, you should like the Dash E does basically everything except the 5 gig that the Hero does. So I don't really consider the Hero a huge advantage over the Dash E. Well, it adds safe boot, right? Like that's kind of the main thing. You get safe boot, you get 5 gig, but other than that, there's not many huge differences between these two boards. So yeah, but maybe you just want a little bit more overclocking, but you're not quite ready to give up your iGPU. That's what the Hero's for. So this has a even stronger VRM because this is on 90 amp smart power stages, but again, doesn't actually really make much of a difference. This is, you get the same power delivery for the memory as what you got on the Apex. So basically the best memory power delivery on Z490. You've got this rear I/O with 10, this is actually basically the same rear I/O as what you got on the Formula. There's a Thunderbolt 3 add-in card that this board comes with, and that's basically the main advantage it has over the Formula. Oh, and it also has all of the LN2 overclocking switches and buttons that you'd get on an Apex. So basically, if you really wanted the thing is, this is $750, and it's like, so if you wanted a really expensive version of the Apex, this is that. Also, this has no iGPU power, which in my opinion is kind of ridiculous for a $750 motherboard, but it's this weird mishmash of features between the Apex and the Formula, and then you add the Thunderbolt 3 and it's just like, so it tries to do everything, but it still doesn't power your iGPU. Now, the board that actually does everything is the Z490 Godlike from MSI. We've got a all SMD aluminum polymer output filter for the VCore VRM. We've got MSI's best implementation of their tabbed daisy chain, which now it's on an 8-layer PCB, so it's better now. You've got a fail set button. You've got a postcode that you can't see because it's hiding above the colorful OLED screen. There's troubleshooting LEDs, voltage read points, retry button, power button, reset button. You've got a more flexible PCIe slot layout than what you get on the Formula on the Extreme. You've got 10 gig LAN, a Quantia, 2.5 gig Realtek, Wi-Fi 6, Thunderbolt 3 built into the motherboard, clear CMOS button, flashback, BIOS flashback button, 90 amp smart power stages, 16-phase VCore, and an iGPU phase. This board actually does everything. There's, again, just one problem. It's $750 bloody dollars. So in my opinion, you should figure out what it is that you actually want your motherboard to do and then spend half as much money, because essentially you can get you can basically get half of the feature set of this board on any motherboard in the $300 price range, right? That's kind of the thing, is you want a postcode and a lot of overclocking, like strong VRM, that kind of thing. You could get the Z490E. Maybe you want more overclocking, you could get the Unify instead. Maybe you want more workstation, maybe you want Thunderbolt. Well, there's the ProArt and there's the Vision D. So, yeah, but technically speaking, yes, this does do everything. Absolutely everything. It's also $750, so it's gonna, ridiculous board. And the Extreme's also very ridiculous. So that is the progression of the various Z490 motherboards. In my opinion, the sweet spots are $200 with the, Tomahawk, Gaming Edge, Vision G. This is sort of the sweet spot. The Gaming X is also, in my opinion, a solid, basic gaming build motherboard. If you're not going to be hammering your memory, this is definitely a board worth considering. But, well, yeah, no, definitely. How many people, you don't necessarily need dual LAN. It's just, you might want, more USB ports, stronger VRM. You get that here. but you don't care about memory overclocking. That's kind of the thing with this board. And then the other sweet spots, I mean, well, for small form factor boards, basically between $200 and $300, you get, in my opinion, all of the reasonable boards. Then I'd consider the Apex, and then above that, it's just kind of boards that, in my opinion, are really silly. They're not necessarily wrong in any way, but they just don't add enough over the $300 boards to really justify their own existence. But yeah, so that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comments section below. If you'd like to support us at Gamers Nexus, there's store.gamersnexus.net, and then there's also the Gamers Nexus Patreon, where you can just support us directly, and there's links to both of those down in the description below as well. So yeah, that is it for the video. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.